Right. Welcome everyone. I'm Laura, the Service Development Officer for Merton Libraries, and I'm just going to tell you first of all that this will be recorded. So if you don't want to appear on screen, it will only be the speaker. So questions towards the end, you can write them in the chat instead of say them. And tonight I'm very happy that we've got Alice with us. And yeah, you're a writer, literature professional and award-winning poet, and Alice is currently based in Edinburgh, and in 2019 was the Scottish Book Trust New Writers Awardee for poetry, and you've taught creative writing at the University of Dundee, and her debut non-fiction book, A Spell in the Wild, A Year and 6 Centuries of Magic, was published last year. And we are going to start now. I'm going to hand you over to Alice, who's going to do a reading, and then I've got a few questions to ask, and then we're going to put it to the audience after that. So Alice, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I was so delighted to be invited, and I'm so happy to be here. I hope you will forgive any strange noises. I have my book in one hand and a handful of dog treats in the other hand because I couldn't get a dog sitter, so he's under the table. So if any of you have any questions that come up throughout the talk that you think, I'd love to ask that, please put them in the chat. You can put them in the chat as we go, and we can always just get to them at the end. So I'm going to start off tonight with a reading from the book A Spell in the Wild. I'm just going to read two sections that I think kind of sum up what the book is trying to do. So, one evening in the late dusk, I am walking home. The shapes of the houses slope away from the road, which is full of darkly honeyed light. The sun has gone, but it has left behind its glow. Quiet, in soft shoes, I move like a shadow past the neatly kept gardens. I am there, but almost not there. Something trots along behind me, and I turn, presuming that it's a small dog, and that people behind it will be its owner. The street is empty of people, though, and what is running along behind me, close enough that I could reach down and touch it, is a little fox. It might be unwell, hungry. It's certainly behaving strangely, even for a city fox. None of the usual bent-nose wariness in its gait. But it looks well enough. Coat glossy, tail full, ears whole. I keep my pace, and it keeps its pace. I am a little frightened that it will bite me, but it's so pretty, and the whole thing is so unusual, that I move past that fear just. In a low voice, I speak, ask it how it is, what it's doing. Is it off to the park that lies behind my house? Has it brought me a message? No, of course not. Has it had a good day? The sort of questions largely that you might ask a colleague or someone you found yourself sitting next to on a train. It doesn't reply, but keeps to the shadow of the wall, just behind my heels. It isn't hurrying me up, but it isn't letting me slow down either. When I turn into my street, we turn together. I wonder if it comes this way to reach the railway bridge. Surely it could just slip through the park fence instead. It is lovely, and in the low light it seems to glow, feral and strange. It looks as if it has stepped out of a story, but of course the streets belong to it as much as me, and it is no myth, all burnished fur and elegant nose. I reach my house, and half expect it to come down the path towards me, to be let in for supper. But it doesn't. It sits at my gate and looks at me until I unlock my door. I won't be able to see it once I'm inside, but I can still feel its attention through the front door. I stand behind the door's reassuring solidity for a moment and breathe. I have been scared, I realize. I am not used to encountering foxes. that want to be close to me. Outside, everything on the street is quiet. I ask everyone about this. Is this a regular thing? Have other people seen this fox? Nobody else has. Evenings for the next few weeks are spent looking to see if the fox is local, if he's loitering in the park or by the station. Of course, I never see him again. I tell someone at my office who looks at me over their coffee cup. You know why these things happen to you, don't you? He asks me. It's because you're a witch. Just like that, matter of fact, casually, before he turns back to his work. He's being entirely serious, no hint of a wind-up, and I'm so flabbergasted that my mouth won't work to form a witty response. I am 21 years old, and this is the first time anyone has ever called me a witch. Witchcraft starts happening when our bodies come right up to the edge of their sensory and linguistic abilities, and life keeps going anyway. It happens when we realize that we cannot truly describe the way flowers smelled one night on our holiday, but that we can hold the scent inside us, can conjure it back. When we try to describe the way geranium petals hold the light of the day inside them until the last second of dusk, seem somehow lambent in their redness, as if they could single-handed stop the night from happening, we realize that we can't. Not even if we were biologists and could describe the mechanism, or poets and could wax lyrical, or photographers with extraordinary lenses. We could never actually, properly, fully and entirely convey to anyone else the experience that we had watching it happen. The edges of language are sharp and pervert our meanings sideways. What the edges tell us, if we listen to them, is that there are experiences we can have that we cannot talk about using normal means, or at least not satisfactorily. These are experiences not just of our single personhood, but also of relation. They are experiences of the world in the world. They are experiences where flowers reach their light right into our eyes. They are experiences where we feel as if we are full of holes, as if the world can come not only close against us, but can actually enter right into us, so that we are as shot through with it, as if we were Saint Sebastian and the world were arrows. The world does this, demonstrates occasionally that it isn't just connected to us, rather it is us. We are then overpowered by it, entered by it and transformed. And in the same way, we enter the world daily and transform it, for better or for worse. Every time we act, every time we think even, we are shaping the world and it is shaping us, and there is no escape from either. Understanding those encounters is the job of witchcraft. Learning how to enter them, how to court them, how to cause them, that is magic.
Oh, thank you, Alice. That was beautifully read. We'll go into the questions now. So yeah, your book, A Spell in the Wild, explores what it means to be a witch today. What inspired your idea for the book?
Well, so it was a very sort of, maybe a bit of an unusual road to publication, or road to writing the book, which was that I have for a long time been an academic who researches environment, and particularly the relationship between poetry and the environment, words and the world, basically, is my area of research. And I've also for a long time been somebody with a witchcraft practice or a magic practice ever since I can remember. And I had a conversation with an editor, and she suggested that I put those two things together. And so I discovered, of course, in the way of all these things, that they had always been together for me. They had always both been, you know, part of my life. So they weren't really separate at all. And when I was thinking about how to write this book, how best to talk about them, I sort of thought to myself, well, what is a really sensible organizing principle that everybody can get behind? And I thought, well, a year. So the book is laid out. It's a year, very literally. All the chapters are a month. So it starts in September, because I don't think any of us really ever grow out of that feeling that September is back to school month, that September is the start of the year. And it goes all the way through to the following September, and it sort of follows the themes of the year. And I was really inspired to do it like that, because I think when we often come to nonfiction books, particularly, it can be hard to sit down and read them in one sitting, or the way you might read a fiction book. And I wanted people to be able to kind of join me in the journey of a year and kind of go through a whole year with me. And I've had lots of readers message me to tell me that they actually read the book kind of one chapter a month for a year, which is exactly how it's meant to be read. And so I'm so delighted that I was able to kind of take those aspects of my life that have always been there and really explore them and unpack them. And the other kind of thing that inspired it was, I don't know how many people in the audience have read witchcraft books, or kind of, you know, spirituality books from more traditional books, and have found them quite, I always found them a bit off-putting. They always seemed quite technical, or they always seemed to need loads of specialist equipment that you needed to go out and buy a load of crystals, or and I really wanted to write a book that reflected my experience of having a magical practice, which is that you really don't need any specialist equipment. And one of the things that my book contains in it at the end of every chapter are activities or recipes or spells that you can hopefully do on your own that connect to the themes of the chapter or the time of the year. And it's been my kind of mission to demystify and kind of take away from consumer culture a lot of this magical practice, and really just say to people, look, you can do it with stuff you've got in your house, you can do it with whatever is already around you. You don't need to rush out and buy all these things, which, you know, I suppose if I become really famous, I've really shot myself in the foot, because I can't come out with a line of scented candles or crystals or whatever. But I really strongly feel that you really don't need those things. And so I wanted to write a book about how to access the environment when you maybe don't have a great amount of access to it, and how to access magic without feeling that you need to kind of enter into this very intimidating discourse of what you need to be a witch, and you don't need anything, you just need yourself.
Great. And I think actually you kind of answered my second question a little bit, but I'll ask it anyway. What does witchcraft mean to you?
Well, it's really interesting, because I think I get a lot of questions from people that say, people who ask kind of, well, what is witchcraft? And the way that, so I teach courses on the history and theory and practice of witchcraft and tarot with my colleague Claire Askew, who is also a writer. And we always say to people, well, witchcraft is is the practice of harnessing your will to affect change in the world. And every time we go out in the world, we do that. But witchcraft is kind of the practice of becoming intentional about it. And I think that lots of us, when we're little, or maybe when we're going through stressful times in our lives, naturally turn to forms of superstition that echo that. So making a birthday wish is a really good example of something like that. I mean, if you've ever blown out a candle and made a wish, you've done magic. That's what I always say to people. That's, you know, it might feel just like superstition, but it comes from somewhere. And so for me, magic is a way of relating to the world. It's not a religion. So the religions that are often associated with the practice of magic are things like Wicca or paganism. And paganism is not a specific religion. It refers to the kind of umbrella of people who have beliefs that are outside the major dominant world religions. But witchcraft is a practice. It's not a religion itself. So I know lots of people who are Christians, for example, or Buddhists, and practice a form of magic. And so for me, it is, you know, my spiritual beliefs are very connected to it, but it's also a practice with all of the the meaning of that word, you know, all of the meaning of like getting stuff wrong and trying stuff again. And if anyone, you know, people describe, for example, having a yoga practice. And I know that when I've had a yoga practice, a lot of it has involved swearing under my breath in a class when I'm being told I'm not very bendy, and you know, wishing I didn't have to go to yoga because, oh, I'm knackered. And magic is really similar. The practice of magic, people think it's all, you know, smells and bells and conjuring demons. It's not. It's you know, trying desperately to put out something that you've set on fire that's a bit too big for the thing you're burning it in. And it's lots of repetition. Like anything, it's a practice. You get better the more you do it. So it's a practical mode of relation to the world for me. It's the way that I find it easiest and clearest to relate myself out to the world, is to come back always to this practice. And I said, you know, it's about exerting your will in the world. And I think some people can think, oh, wow, that sounds really selfish. Like what's that? Do you just want like to get loads of money? And I have to say that of all the ways I can imagine of getting loads of money, witchcraft is probably the least effective. But your will in the world can also mean wanting good things for other people. So a lot of my magical practice is centered around herbal medicine, for example. So I make quite a lot of home remedies. I am very interested in trying to help people feel better. So I think there can be a very therapeutic aspect to magic practice. And certainly the world, I think, the way that magic can relate out to the world in terms of environmental awareness and environmental care is a very hopefully unselfish way of being in the world. It's hopefully all about helping the world and acknowledging your place in it. So for me, it can be a very grounding, thing. I suppose it's what it means to me is a sort of foundational way of walking through the world.
Well, thank you. And do you think the perceptions of witchcraft have kind of changed in modern times?
Yeah, so I would say they definitely have. So witchcraft in the UK was actually illegal until 1952, when the British Witchcraft Act was repealed. And that act was replaced with a different act, which is the Fraudulent Psychics and Mediums Act. So, you know, witchcraft has been literally illegal in this country until the mid-1950s, which I know is a long time ago now, but it's comparatively modern in our history when we think about how long ago something like the witch trials was. So people's understandings of what witches are have changed dramatically since essentially early Christian Britain. So we're talking the late Roman period onwards, all the way to the present day. And witches, it's really interesting. If I can geek out about etymology for a little bit, the word witch is only one of millions of words that we used to have to describe occult practitioners. And witch meant a very specific thing historically, because you might have someone who was a sorcerer, or someone who was a cunning woman or a cunning man, which is sort of like a folk healer. But a witch was usually female, although not always, but it referred to someone whose body became a vessel for satanic power and possession. So witches were not thought to have any power of their own. They were thought to invite the devil into their body, often through a satanic baptism or through performing sex with the devil. And then the devil would fill them with his power, and then they would sort of be agents who could do his bidding. And that is a very different thing to the way that we see witches just, you know, in these days. But one of the difficulties is that in the interim, we've actually lost all of those other words. So if I went around saying to people, oh, I'm a cunning woman, people would be like, oh, that's not very nice. Why are you so cunning? Like, whereas cunning really means kind of somebody who can work enchantments, someone who can kind of move between worlds. And one of the things that contemporary witchcraft, the contemporary witchcraft revival is doing, is it's sort of trying to reintroduce a degree of nuance and variation between types of witch. So you hear people, there's a great BuzzFeed quiz, by the way, if anyone's interested in something a little bit silly and lighthearted, which is like, what kind of witch are you? But, you know, people talk about green witchcraft or hedge witchcraft or kitchen witchcraft or high ritual witchcraft, which is maybe what we imagine from from films like The Craft, but, you know, lots of candles and velvet and ropes and bells and very sort of Catholic in its ritual apparatus. But now we're kind of inventing all of these different words for what kind of witch are you and what kind of magic do you do? And actually we used to have words for all of that stuff. It's just that they died out. So witch has gone from being a word that you would never historically have called yourself, because it was essentially, you know, it could be a death sentence, to a word that people are happy to call themselves. And what's been really notable on my courses is that I suppose I'm very used to this. You know, I have a book out about it. I can't really hide it anymore. People say, "Oh no, I told my husband I'm going to an art history class," or, "Oh no, I've just said I'm going to a creative writing class." And we say to people in the first week, you know, would you define yourself as a witch? And loads and loads of people go, "Oh no, I'm quite witchy." Lots of people use the adjective witchy, but I'm not a witch. So Claire and I have coined a term. I mean, I'm sure we didn't come up with it, but we call people witch adjacent, because often people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm witch adjacent. I do witchy stuff, but I'm not going to commit to the full witch." And then, amazingly, I got a row from this man who I don't know. It's always a man. He was like, "I can't believe you use the word witchy. That completely demeans the seriousness of the craft." And I was like, "It doesn't. It really doesn't. It's the adjectival form of witch." You know, it describes how people feel about what they do, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that we don't have anymore this idea of degrees of nuance with regard to whether you're a witch or not, and it's often not a binary position.
Along the way with whatever it is.
Often you can do some things, but not others. So, for example, my mum, who would say, "Oh, I'm not a witch." I'm like, "Don't be silly, Alice." If she wants good weather, she puts a knife in the ground and a broom in the tree and names the specific day. And she's done that. Someone taught it to her. She's always done it. We always have fair weather on our fireworks party, which is what she usually does it for. That's maybe it. That's maybe the only witchy thing she does, or certainly the only thing that I know she does. And I think that's witch adjacent. That's witchy. I think it's a really good term. So I think the way that witches have the perception of witches has obviously changed hugely. You know, I can be here talking to you guys about what witchcraft is and not worry about being burned. But also, we still lack confidence, I think, a clear sense of what a witch might be as well. And also, we lack a lot of the nuance as to how we might describe witches or witchcraft or the occult or kind of strange acts that people do, superstition, magical thinking, all of that stuff. So I think it has changed, and I think it is still changing.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you. Yeah. And in your book as well, because you say that magic is deeply personal to the individual as well, or it can be. And I think you kind of touch on some of those kind of ritual type things, as in, you know, you might associate somebody with something, and therefore your spells or your rituals would be different to somebody else. And how do you go about kind of finding magic, I suppose, in your everyday life?
So yeah, I do. I mentioned the fact that witchcraft is very personal to the individual, and that's because witchcraft works with metaphors and associations and symbolism, and we all have a symbolic vocabulary. And there's some symbolism that we can all agree on. So most people probably here would say, "Oh, a 4-leaf clover, that's lucky," and that's kind of a common symbol that we can all agree on. But someone might have been proposed to outside a Norman church, let's say. So every time they see a Norman arch in a church window, they think, "Oh, that makes me think of my husband. How lovely." And so perhaps if they were doing a spell for goodness, happiness in their relationship, they might be like, "Oh, well, I'm going to do it somewhere where I can see a Norman church, because that feels really, really important to me." And those are things that you might not know about somebody else. And I'm really keen that a big part of witchcraft and magic is tuning into your personal symbolism, your personal symbology, if you will, And lots of people say, and it might be true for people in this room and it might not be, that they have stuff that happens to them. I always see, I always seem to see hedgehogs and no one else does, but I always seem to spot them. Or, oh, it's the color blue. Whenever anything good's going to happen, I see loads and loads of blue things. Or I know someone who, before major life events, experiences a lot of deja vu. So they often know that something's coming because they feel like life is repeating. Or I know people who see peacocks, and you think peacocks aren't very common. I mean, I don't know when I last saw a peacock or a representation of a peacock, but I know people for whom they're really significant. And it can be something as little as hearing a special song on the radio when you're about to go and do something really, really difficult or kind of exciting or major in your life. And I think tuning into what those patterns are for you is a hugely important way of tapping into your magic, because that's a way of the world sending signals. And if you pay attention to those signals, you can kind of cultivate a relationship with them. So in terms of how I find magic in the everyday, I think the everyday is super magic. Is it all right if I take this audience question? Because
yeah, of course. Yeah, I was just going to say.
So Mabina, a really, really, also hello, it's lovely to see you. So a really easy way is if you keep a diary or a journal, is to note down what you were doing when you heard them, or kind of what's surrounding them. So quite often, for example, I will find a stone with a mark on it that makes a perfect circle. So that's a thing that I find quite a lot of. I've got a weirdly disproportionate quantity of those in my life, and circles appearing on rock is a big thing for me. And I will often tend to note them down, like maybe in my notes app, and then I can look back and I can be like, oh, that happened 3 days before this thing. Or if I see one and I've got a big question in my head, do I take this job? Do I agree to this thing? Often seeing one can be a really good prod, because if I've got a gut feeling about something, if I think, oh God, I should really say no to that, I really don't want to do it, and I see a stone with a circle in it, I think, oh yeah, I'm right, I'm on the right track, I should say no to that. And so it's about allowing your attention to focus on these things and then linking them in properly to your life. Because I know what you mean. It's easy for me to say, tune into the signals, and people are like, well, what do I do if I see a robin then? Like, we'll panic. And the answer is contextualize it in your life, because you'll probably find that the signals start to be patterned to your life. So I know people who see particular birds around the anniversaries of the death of their loved ones. And that can be a really common thing, especially if they're birds that person really loved, or it might not be birds, it might be a color or a song, or so that can be a really good way. And the other thing can be to read up about those symbols. So obviously rocks with circles on them is a little bit niche, but if you are someone who sees peacocks, would be a really good example. There is loads of symbology and mythology about the peacock. They can be very lucky, they can be very unlucky, because they're said to be the eyes of the goddess Hera, who used them to watch Zeus, who was always cheating on her with mortals, and so they are vindictive eyes.
I always heard, I remember reading when I was a kid in a book of Greek myths that they were the 100 eyes of Argus.
Yes, the 100 eyes of Argus, exactly. So there's all of these, which I think Hera asks to watch over. So there's all of these kind of brilliant associations, and then maybe you get onto Argus, and who is Argus, or who is the goddess Hera, and is she someone who's going to be important to me if I'm, some people really like deity worship, some people don't. But if you are someone who is drawn to worshipping and observing deities, then maybe that's a way in. It's also possible that you see certain forms or signals when you are in certain sorts of landscape. So when you're in the mountains, when you're in certain parts of Britain or the world, and it can sort of be useful thinking, am I really happy here? Is that, is this a place I'm drawn to? Why am I drawn to this place? Is there something for me here that I should stay and find out about? I know someone who often finds like particular sorts of flotsam and jetsam on the beaches, that they always seem to find little plastic toys, and so they've done a lot of research into where the original, because sometimes they say things like 50,000 Garfield telephones wash up on the shores of France because 100,000 of them slipped off a transport ship, And so that person has sort of tracked the locations of where these things might come from and is thinking, hang on, is this, is this related to my ancestors? Is this, and sometimes there are no clear answers, but I think it's also a form of self-attention. So the more you tune into what the world is telling you, often the more in tune you are with yourself and what you need and what you're going through. And also this person, particularly the plastic toy person, was like, this is dreadful. I can't believe that my special signal is like a kind of Anthropocene pollutant. Why don't I get like a blackbird or a poppy or something nice? And so has done a lot of like beach clearing and donated to environmental charities and does kind of environmental volunteering, because they feel that the world has sort of been tapping them on the shoulder and going, hey, you're really noticing this and this is a problem. You're obviously kind of meant to be someone who can do something about this on a small scale or whatever. And they've found a lot of purpose and joy out of responding to the world in that way. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Oh, yes, thank you. And you speak about the natural world. Have you always been interested in nature from a young age?
Yes and no. I was a very bookish child. I liked to be in a nice, cool, shady place with a book. But I've always loved being in the woods. I've always loved being in landscapes. But I've also I'm quite short, and I was a really short child. And there was I don't know if anyone knows the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, but they have a miniatures garden. They have like a small rocks with little tiny alpine and other minute plants that grow often in very remote, very arid conditions, and there's not a lot of nutrients in the earth. And these plants are amazing. They're fully functional plants, but they're this size. And so I used to look at those for hours. They were in these raised beds so that they were just at sort of toddler height, and I used to look at them for hours. And so I've always been really interested in micro landscapes. So one of the things that I often do, even to this day, is I will go into the woods or somewhere rural or somewhere, my local park, and find a rock or a bit of tree where there are loads of things. So maybe little fungus and little mosses and tiny insects scurrying to and fro, and it's sort of a perfect bio microcosm of decay and growth and activity, and I can watch them for hours. I find them fascinating. Or ants' nests. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of ants' nests. I mean, ants are a bit of a pain, but I love watching the activity of ants in and out of an anthill. In Scotland, you often get anthills under pine needle in pine needle forests. And I've sat on my fair share of them without realizing and being covered in ants. But they're amazing to watch. And I think I am very interested in the outdoors, but I've never been a great mountaineer or a great, I don't really like camping, for example. I find it quite stressful. I really like to have a bed and a loo. But I like being in the outdoors. So I'm not one of these people that says, oh, to be a witch, you've got to like go to the remote lake and climb the mountain on the full moon and because actually you don't. You can go to your park. And at the moment, I'm taking my dog out at 5 a.m. every morning for a pee because he can't go the whole way through the night. And like 5 a.m., even in the middle of Edinburgh, is the most beautiful, nature-filled place, because you see the foxes slinking home and you see the dawn chorus and all the birds getting up and doing business. And so nature is there, even when you're not, walking in 6 miles to a pristine natural park.
Because you also talk about in the book actually like the positive impact that nature can have on well-being, and obviously the past kind of year or so that's obviously become particularly important for people kind of reconnecting with nature. Can you kind of expand a little bit for those who maybe haven't read the book, kind of what you kind of said about that?
Yeah, so I did grandly declare the other day that in a fit of fear of another lockdown, I did say I never want to take another walk or have another bath ever again in my life, thank you. But that being said, when I don't feel like that, I think that even really urban nature has the most enormous possibility to broaden our horizons. One of the things that I think we've all had to do because we've been so trapped at home and so limited in what we can do. And the thing that people forget is that for lots of people, that is life. For lots of particularly chronically ill or disabled people, the normal is not going to include loads and loads of going out, and it never has done. But I think it's been interesting to see how people have responded to those restrictions. And one of the things that has brought me a lot of joy, and I think a lot of other people too, is just the sense of the seasons changing where you are, and suddenly slowing down and realizing, you know, if you take a walk around the same little park or the same block every day for a year, you see all of the millions of extraordinary natural changes that are happening, even if it's not some wonderful big green space. I mean, you see weeds come up through the pavement. So one that we're getting a lot of at the moment is a weed called pineapple weed, which is really, really beautiful. It's a little wild chamomile, and it's incredibly hardy, and it comes up through pavements. You've probably seen it around the bottoms of lampposts, for example. It thrives in terrible soil, and it doesn't require anything, and it's edible. You can eat the flowers. They taste of pineapple. And they have calming qualities, like chamomile does. So I saw tons of that in the city, which I normally would ignore. When it comes up and it flowers and it has seeds and then it dies back and it's beautiful. And that sort of thing kind of makes you remember, it connects you to a much greater series of systems that are going on all the time. And I think when we have felt very lonely and isolated from each other, I know that for me, I've had a great deal of solace in feeling really much more connected with the bigger cycles of my local area, which is not to say that I've been virtuously delighted to be so limited. I really haven't, but I do think it's been an important way of we often think that being in nature is something you go over there to do. You know, you drive your car, or you take a train, or you go to the Lake District to be in nature for a few days, or you go somewhere very, very beautiful. And actually what's been really nice, I think, is realizing that there are wonderful things near where we live. And what I hope it has done for people is make them realize that they have to protect those things. I mean, I'm very, very fond of my local park, which previously I've always thought, oh, it's a bit grim. It's always full of 8,000 noisy children, and there's always loads and loads of bouncy dogs and blah, blah, blah. So, but actually it was a complete lifesaver, that little lung in the middle of the city. And actually I became very intimately acquainted with it. And it was very funny. We had ducks on the pond, and they must have been the best fed ducks in Edinburgh history, because every single person, it was the highlight of their day. They would come and feed the ducks during lockdown. It's just what they did. And I think it's so interesting that we all connected with these animals. And we were so concerned, like, how many ducklings were there and would they all survive? And you would see people walking around the park and you know, carrying their little bags of bread and all the rest of it. And it made me feel really just delighted that we were in a position where we were all focused on these ducks, which normally we really wouldn't have been. Half of us would have been busy commuting and would never even have seen them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think I might actually throw the question. I have got quite a few more, but I'm going to throw it out to the audience, because I feel, yeah, the time, yeah, it would be nice to have someone from the audience, I think. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, if not, I can kind of ask a few more. Okay, maybe I'll ask a few more, and then if you feel brave enough, you can kind of chip in whenever. I want to know how you kind of got into writing, I suppose, first of all.
I suppose I've always written. Ever since I was little. I was on the school newspaper. I, you know, have written poems and stories since I was very young, and then I read English at university and became an academic. So have written academically for years and years and years. I mean, you produce so much text as an academic, it's incredible, but also have always kept up a poetry practice. And it was really lovely going into writing it's not a not academic book. I like to think it's very rigorous, but it's not an academic book in the sense that it's not exclusively for an academic audience. And it was such a relief to find that voice and to be able to write in a way that was much more fluent, I think, for a change. And what's really interesting about it is that, so nobody in my family particularly writes, and it was never considered a particularly, I mean, my parents were very supportive, but it was never considered a particularly interesting thing. I mean, it was no more interesting than if I had done ballet or, you know, I think a lot of people think that writing is a very special thing or whatever, but it's it's an interesting one because people, either you get people who are like, oh, anyone can write, or you're like, oh, you know, people are like, oh, writing, it's very, and actually it's like anything else. It's a practice. It's like magic. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And I kept doing it because I liked it. And I didn't like the piano. I gave that up. And I did like singing, and I did a lot of singing, but the thing I did most of was writing because I could do it on my own and just with a pen. I didn't need anyone else. And I can't imagine a world where I don't write. I mean, when I wasn't an academic, I worked in publishing, and I'm about to start a job with Creative Scotland, who are the equivalent of the Arts Council England, looking at other people's applications for money to do writing. So I suppose it's just a fundamental aspect of selfhood in a funny way.
Well, we have another question from the audience. I'll go to that one next. So I'm just going to make my screen a little bit bigger, actually. So it says here from Mobina again, I found the distinction between practicing witchcraft and separating it from belief systems like Wicca new and interesting. Lots of books about witchcraft or witchcraft for beginner books don't make that distinction at all. Are there rituals that follow through in your practice using, I don't know how to pronounce this,
Aphanes
and altars with representations of the goddess, or is the practice of witchcraft something that can be completely personal?
So here is my kind of controversial answer on this. They can be completely separate. Witchcraft is the manifestation into the world of personal power. People have altars because it is useful to have a focus for the power. So the reason that people think about magic wands, the reason they make an appearance in Harry Potter, is they are a real thing. And what they do is they focus the power as it leaves the body and enters the world. That's literally all they do. It's like a needle helps the hand pierce flesh. A spade helps the hand dig soil. They are a focal point for our effort, essentially the same way a spade is, or a wooden spoon in the kitchen. You can do all of these things without reference to the goddess, any deities. I think it would be difficult to do it without reference to the world or the universe. I know lots of people who don't have pagan spiritual beliefs, who think, I'm doing this with the world, so I take the power of the world because I'm part of it. I was born from it and will return to it, and so it comes through me. And so instead of an altar with a goddess on it, they might have a picture of a globe, or they might have, beautiful nature imagery, or even just a vase of flowers and some earth, or whatever it is. People who believe in the universe, obviously we all believe in the universe. It's a physical fact, but the power of the universe to kind of move through them. So maybe what I'm aiming at here is the idea that you don't need to perhaps believe in a stratified higher power. I think it's helpful to at least believe in a network of power that is larger than yourself. But that network of power that is larger than yourself is a demonstrable biological fact. We are all part of the fuel that keeps the earth running, and our bodies will go back into that. And we consume energy and put it out. We're part of a system of processing energy that works all the time. So even if it's just as mechanical as tuning into that energy and realizing that energy comes from everything else and moves through us, and then we move it back out where it moves through everything else and then comes back to us, like the rain cycle. I think that but I don't think you need to believe in the gods or any gods or named higher power. I really don't. And I think that witchcraft books, the reason that witchcraft books don't separate it out is that it's terribly demystifying of me to say this, right? Like, it would be wonderful if I was like, well, no, it's the power of the goddess that moves through me, or it's but I strongly believe, and I say in my book, that gods and goddesses are ways of understanding aspects of the world. So almost all cultures, for example, have a god or goddess of death, and that's because we all experience death and loss, and we want to talk to something with a face. We're humans, we like things with faces, so we put a face on death, and we think, well, if death had a face, what would that face look like? So the Viking goddess Hel, she has half of the face of a beautiful woman and half of her face is rotting, because she rules the realm of the dead, so she is half dead herself and half living, because she's the threshold goddess. And really, that's a very logical extension of the question, well, what might death look like? It's quite a good answer, I think. It feels really believable. And so if you wanted to talk about death in your work, in your magic, you might talk to Hel, because she's one of the faces of death. And it's easy to find out about her. And that's often a way I think people have of accessing gods and goddesses. They are like, they are faces of the parts of the world that don't have faces. And so it can be helpful to talk to them and get to know them. But you can also do that in a way that doesn't involve gods or goddesses at all, I think. And I'm a pantheon person. I like having conversations with gods. I find it very helpful, but I don't think it's necessary. I know lots of people who are very good practitioners who don't do that.
Well, thank you.
I've unmuted myself briefly, I'm so sorry. It's just really interesting to kind of read or hear about a practice that isn't kind of really strongly based in, using specific coloured candles for specific kind of spells and intention setting and things. So it's kind of quite, in a good way, quite far removed from a lot of the stuff you kind of, when you first get into witchcraft and you start looking around for things, that a lot of things are quite sort of formulaic almost, and it's an interesting, I've never ever heard the distinction actually between witchcraft and Wicca as a religion. So this has become one of those, this isn't a question, it's a comment thing, so I'm going to shut up now.
Well, thank you. No, it's lovely. It's really nice to have this conversation, because I think it's really important to have this conversation.
Thank you. And did you do any additional research for your book? I know obviously you've kind of got your academic side, but did you do kind of additional historical kind of research?
So much research. And it was really stressful, because every single one of these chapters could be a doctoral thesis. I'm really bad. I have units in which I write things, which is a hangover from academic requirements. So I can write 100,000 words on something. I can write 10,000 words on something. I can write 5,000 words on something, and I can write 2,000 words on something. But woe betide you if you ask me to write anything in between. I can't do it. My brain can't do it. So this book was originally 110,000 words. It had 13 chapters. I wrote 1 month twice because I couldn't decide what I wanted to write about. And for each 10,000 word essay, which is essentially what these are, I did months and months of research. The thing about writing a book that is not going to be sold as an academic book, so a work of popular nonfiction, especially one that contains memoir within it, so is what we call creative nonfiction, is that you have to wear the knowledge really lightly. You don't want to put off the reader off. You don't want to make them go, oh my God, that's not very relaxing after a hard day of work. This feels like I'm in class. But you also need them to learn all of the really difficult theoretical underpinnings that are behind all of this. And what I hope I've done, if this book is successful in its aim, is make those theories accessible so you don't even know that you're learning them. And then you draw on them when you need them.
Yeah, well, that's what I think I found, is that kind of like they were almost just kind of slipped in there, if you know what I mean. You're kind of reading it, but it seems so part of the book anyway. It doesn't feel like you're being told, like something that you like need to learn, I suppose. It just feels like you're just part of it. It's part of the journey that you go on, like in the book.
That's lovely. That's such a nice compliment.
I had another question. Because I noticed as well you narrated your audiobook version as well yourself. Was that important for you to kind of narrate yourself?
It's a really interesting question. So I did it during COVID. So it was just me and the guy in the studio. It was a really deeply weird experience. It was great fun. So I have a really weird voice. I have an English father. I grew up in Scotland. I've lived in England for a long time. I have a slipping voice. I have a voice that moves very easily between accents. And being Scottish is very important to me. It's shaped my witchcraft. It's shaped my whole self. I mean, it's my home. But the narrator that they had originally chosen for me was this very Scottish actress, and she had a very beautiful voice, but it didn't sound like me. And I sort of politely put my hand up and said, "Is my voice all right? Could I do it? I think I'd be all right at this." And God, it's hard work. It was 4 full days in a recording studio, because every time you make a mistake, you've got to go back and like do the bit over again. And you don't realize how often when you are speaking in normal speech, you swallow or cough or sniff or make a noise. And one of the things that's really hard when you're doing an audiobook is what you do with the spit in your mouth, because as you talk, I'm swallowing that reflexively, As you talk, you build up saliva, and the saliva very subtly changes the tone of your voice. So if you start a sentence at one like spit level, you've sort of got to end it at the other, or it sounds really odd. So if you have to redo something, he'd often make me go back like 3 sentences so that I could match the pitch of it. So it was a fascinating learning process, and I really enjoyed it. But it felt really important to me that I did it because it's such a personal book, and it's, you know, it's very, very personal. I really wanted to be the person who read it, and I've not had any complaints about my weird accent, so hopefully that's fine.
Yeah, I did listen to a bit of it as well. Yeah, and I thought, because you sound like a slightly more Scottish when you're reading the book, like not, you know, like you can kind of, yeah, because in person now I think the accent doesn't come through as strongly, does it? So
no, if you were Scottish, it would come through much more strongly. It's very responsive. I have a very responsive accent. It's very annoying. I sound like 2 different people on the phone. So yeah, it was good. It was good to get to do it. Yeah, I'm aware of the time, by the way. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
I know, that's what I was just thinking. If anyone wants to ask any more questions, otherwise we'll probably wrap it up. So if anyone wants to kind of be brave and ask anything.
And also, would you like to see the dreadful puppy who has been underneath the feet all this time?
Yes, definitely.
And had far too many treats. Bertie, come on. You gonna come up? Oh. Oh God, it was so heavy. Here he is.
Very cute. What's he called? Bertie, did you say?
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. How old is he?
He is 4 months old.
Oh, lovely. Very cute.
He's eaten all the treats. He's probably not going to want his dinner now. But he did stay quiet. So
yeah, he was very well behaved. Very well behaved. Oh, well, thank you so much, Alice. It has been lovely speaking to you and very, very interesting. Yes, and thank you everybody for joining us as well.
Thank you so much for coming, all of you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Good night.
Bye.